Chapter 50. Morning school began at 7, so I had less than 5 hours sleep when I appeared in class. It was ugly weather, too, without wind, remorselessly hot and stagnant. All the color was burnt out of the land, and what few remaining greens there were looked parched and defeated. Processional caterpillars had massacred the pines. The oleander flowers were brown at the edges. Only the sea lived, and I did not begin to think coherently until school was over at noon, and I could plunge into the water and lie in its blue relief. One thing had occurred to me during the morning. Except for the main actors, almost all the German soldiers had looked very young, between 18 and 20. It was the beginning of July. The German and the Greek university terms would probably be over. If Conchis really had some connection with film producing, he could probably have got German students to come easily enough to work for a few days for him and then holiday in Greece. What I could not believe was that having got them to Greece, he would use them only once. More sadism was, as the colonel warned, to come. I floated on my back with my arms out and my eyes shut, crucified in the water. I had already cooled down enough in other ways to know that I wasn't going to write the angry and sarcastic letter I had been phrasing on the return from the ridge. Apart from anything else, it was what the old man would be expecting. I had that morning in school detected something speculative and inquisitive in Demetriades's eyes, and my one sure good move was not to do what was expected. Nor on reflection did I think that there was any great danger for the sisters, as long as he believed them misled. They were safe, or as safe as they always had been. If I was to get them out of it, it was better to wait till they were in front of me, not to warn him of what I intended. And then he had the enormous advantage of giving the entertainment, and such entertainment. It seemed in some peculiar way foolish to be angry about the way the thing had been done, when the staggering fact was that it had been done at all. The post came on the noon boat and was distributed during lunch. I had 3 letters, one of the rare ones from my uncle in Rhodesia, another with one of the information bulletins sent out by the British Council in Athens, and the third, I knew the handwriting, round, a bit loose, big letters. I slit it. My letter to Allison fell out, unopened. There was nothing else. A few minutes later, back in my room, I put it on an ashtray, still unopened, and burnt it. The next day was Friday. I had another letter at lunch. It had been delivered by hand, and I knew the writing. I didn't open it until I had escaped from the dining room, which was as well because its brief contents made me swear aloud. It was as brutal and unexpected as a slap across the face, dateless, placeless, without superscription. Any further visits to Barani will be in vain. I do not think I have to explain why. You have gravely disappointed me, Maurice Conchis. I knew a stunned plunge of disappointment and a bitter anger. What right had he to issue such an arbitrary ukase? It was incomprehensible. It contradicted everything I had learned from Julie, but not as soon as I saw what had happened after I left her. That accusation of treachery gained a fresh significance. I chillingly realized that the occupation episode could also have been a finale, a notice of dismissal. He had no more time for me. But then there were the girls. What story could he have told them, or could tell them, when they knew he had been lying to them? All through that day I half expected to see them appear at the school. They must have seen through him now. I had notions of going to the police, of contacting the British Embassy in Athens. But slowly I came back on a more even keel. I recalled the parallels with the Tempest, and that old man's trial of the young usurper in his domain. I recalled the constant past occasions when Conchis had said the opposite of what he meant. And above all, I remembered Julie, not only the naked body in the sea, and her intuitive trust in our Prospero. I decided by the time I went to bed that it must be taken as some last black joke on his part, some testing trick analogous to the dice game and the suicide pill. I refused to believe that he would really keep either Julie or the truth from me for another week. He must know I should go over to Barani on the morrow. He might carry on with some comedy of intense disapproval, but he would be there, and his other puppet would also be there to help me finally call his bluff. Soon after 2 o'clock on Saturday, I was on my way up into the hills. At 3, I entered the clump of tamarisk. In the blazing heat, the weather remained windless, stagnant. It was difficult to believe that what I had seen had happened. But there were 2 or 3 recently broken twigs and branches, and where the prisoner had dived away there were several overturned stones, their bottoms stained ruddy from the island earth, and more broken sprays of tamarisk. A little higher, I picked up several screwed-out cigarette ends. One was only half smoked, and had the beginnings of the phrase, Leipzig da. I stood on the bluff looking down over the other side of the island. I saw at once that the yacht wasn't there, yet I wouldn't let that kill all hope. I arrived at the gate and walked straight to the house. It lay with the cottage in the sun, closed and deserted. I rattled the French window shutters hard and tried the others, but none of them gave. All the time I kept looking round, not because I actually felt I was being watched, so much as because I felt I ought to be feeling it. They must be watching me, might even be inside the house, smiling in the darkness just behind the shutters, only 4 or 5 feet away. I went and gazed down at the private beach. It lay in the heat, the jetty, the pump-house, the old bulk, the shadowed mouth of the little cave, but no boat. Then to the Poseidon statue, silent trees, to the cliff to where I had sat with Julie the Sunday before. The lifeless sea was ruffled here and there by a lost zephyr, by a stippling school of sardines, dark ash-blue lines that snaked, broad then narrow, in slow motion across the shimmering, mirageous surface, as if the water was breathing corruption. I began to walk along toward the bay with the 3 cottages. The landscape to the east came into view, and then I came on the boundary wire of Barani. As everywhere else, it was rusty, a token barrier, not a real one. Shortly beyond it, the inland cliff fell 60 or 70 feet to lower ground. I bent through the wire and walked inland along the edge. There were 1 or 2 places where one could clamber down, but at the bottom there was an impenetrable jungle of scrub and thorn ivy. I came to where the fence turned west toward the gate. There were no telltale overturned stones, no obvious gaps in the wire. Following the cliff to where it leveled out, I eventually came on the seldom-used path I had taken on my previous visit to the cottages. Shortly afterwards, I was walking through the small olive orchard that surrounded them. I watched the 3 whitewashed houses as I approached through the trees. Strange that there was not even a chicken, or a donkey, or a dog. There had been 2 or 3 dogs there. 2 of the 1-story cottages were adjoining. Both front doors were bolted, with bolt handles padlocked down. The third looked more openable, but it gave only an inch before coming up hard. There was a wooden bar inside. I went round the back. The door there was also padlocked, but on the last side I came to, over a hen coop, I found 2 of the shutters were loose. I peered in through the dirty windows. An old brass bed, a cube of folded bedclothes in the middle of it, a wall of photographs and icons, 2 cane-bottomed wooden chairs, a cot beneath the window, an old trunk. On the windowsill in front of me was a brown candle in a Retsina bottle, a broken garland of immortelle, a rusty sprocket wheel, and a month of dust. I closed the shutters. The second cottage had another padlocked bolt on its back door, but though the last one had the bolt, it was simply tied down with a piece of fishing twine. I struck a match. Half a minute later I was standing inside the cottage, in another bedroom. Nothing in the darkened room looked in the least suspicious. I went through to the kitchen and living room in front. From it, a door led straight through into the cottage next door, another kitchen, beyond it, another musty bedroom. I opened one or two drawers, a cupboard. The cottages were, beyond any possibility of faking, typical impoverished islanders' homes. The one strange thing was that they were empty. I came out and fastened the bolt handle with a bit of wire. 50 yards or so away, among the olives, I saw a whitewashed privy. I went over to it. A spider's web stretched across the hole in the ground. A collection of torn squares of yellowing Greek newspaper hung from a rusty nail. Defeat. I went to the cistern beside the double cottage, took off the wooden lid and let down an old bucket on a rope that stood beside the whitewashed neck. Cool air rushed up like an imprisoned snake. I sat on the neck and swallowed great mouthfuls of the water. It had that living, stony freshness of cistern water, so incomparably sweeter than the neutral flavor of tap water. A brilliant red and black jumping spider edged along the putiole toward me. I laid my hand in its path, and it jumped onto it. Holding it up close, I could see its minute black eyes, like gig lamps. It swiveled its massive square head from side to side in an arachnoidal parody of Conscius's quizzing, and once again, as with the owl, I had an uncanny apprehension of a reality of witchcraft, Conscius's haunting, brooding omnipresence. What really defeated me was this proof that I was not indispensable. I had assumed the experiment needed my presence above all, but perhaps it didn't, and I had been a mere side plot, discarded as soon as I had tried to gain too much prominence. What riled me most was to find myself apparently in the same category as Mitford, and for no clear reason at all. I felt fear as well, a sharp paranoia. Although he might have found some lie to tell the girls, some reason for my not being able to come that weekend, there remained the possibility that they were all three deceiving me. But how could I believe that now? All those kisses, franknesses, caresses, that token coupling in the night water? No girl could pretend to want and to enjoy such things unless she was a prostitute. It was unthinkable. Perhaps the clue lay in dispensability. I was being taught some obscure metaphysical lesson about the place of man in existence, about the limitations of the egocentric view, but it seemed much more like a piece of gratuitous cruelty, closer to tormenting dumb animals than any true teaching. I was drowned in a sea of mistrust, not only of outward appearances, but of deeper motives as well. For weeks I had had a sense of being taken apart, disconnected from a previous self, or the linked structures of ideas and conscious feeling that constitute self. And now it was like lying on the workshop bench, a litter of parts, the engineer gone, and not being quite sure how one put oneself together again. I found myself thinking of Allison, for the first time less with guilt than regret. I almost wished she was there beside me for companionship, to talk to nothing more, like a man friend. I had hardly given her a thought since the return of my unopened letter. Events had already swept her into the past, but now I recalled those moments on Parnassus, the sound of the waterfall, the sun on my back, her closed eyes, her whole body arched to have me deeper. That strange certainty I had always had of knowing, even when she lived, that strange certainty I always had of knowing, even when she lied, how and why she lied, that she couldn't lie in simple fact. Of course it made her, in daily terms, dull and predictable, rather tediously transparent. What had always attracted me in the opposite sex was what they tried to hide, what provoked all the metaphorical equivalents of reducing them out of their clothes into nakedness. That had always been too easy with Allison, and anyway, I stood up and screwed out my promiscuity of mind with my cigarette. She was spilt milk, or spilt semen. I wanted Julie 10 times more. I spent the rest of that afternoon searching the coast eastward of the 3 cottages, then came back past them to Barani again, nicely timed for tea under the colonnade, but the place remained as deserted as before. I spent a further hour searching for a note, a sign, anything. It became like the idiot ransacking of a drawer already 10 times searched. At 6 I set off back to the school with nothing but a useless rage of frustration. With Conchis, with Julie, with everything. On the far side of the village there was another harbor, used exclusively by the local fishermen. It was avoided by everyone from the school, and by everyone with any claim to social tone in the village. Many of the houses had been ruthlessly dilapidated. Some were no more than the carious stumps of walls, and the ones that still stood along the broken quays had corrugated iron roofs, concrete patches, and other unsightly evidence of frequent mending. There were 3 tavernas, but only one was of any size. It had a few rough wooden tables outside its doors. Once before, coming back from one of my solitary winter walks, I had gone there for a drink. I remembered the taverna keeper was loquacious and comparatively easy to understand. By island standards, and perhaps because he was Anatolian by birth, conversable. His name was Georgiou, rather foxy-faced, with a lick of gray-black hair and a small mustache that gave him a comic resemblance to Hitler. On Sunday morning I sat under a catalpa, and he came up, obsequiously delighted to have caught a rich customer. Yes, he said, of course he would be honored to have an ouzo with me. He called one of his children to serve us, the best ouzo, the best olives. Did things go well at the school? Did I like Greece? I let him ask the usual questions. Then I set to work. 12 or so faded carmine and green kikes floated in the still blue water in front of us. I pointed to them. It's a pity you do not have any foreign tourists here. Yachts. He spat out an olive stone. Fraxos is dead. I thought Mr. Conchis from Barani kept his yacht over here sometimes. That man. I knew at once that Georgiou was one of the village enemies of Conchis. You have met him? I said no, but I was thinking of visiting him. He did have a yacht then? Yes, but it never came to this side of the island. Had he ever met Conchis? No. Does he have houses in the village? Only the one where Hermes lived. It was near a church called St. Elias, at the back of the village. As if changing the subject, I asked idly about the 3 cottages near Barani. Where had the families gone? He shook his hand to the south. To the mainland. For the summer. He explained that a minority of the island fishermen were semi-nomadic. In winter they fished in the protected waters off Fraxos, but in summer, taking their families with them, they wandered round the Peloponnesus even as far as Crete, in search of better fishing. He returned to the cottages. He pointed down and then made drinking gestures. The cisterns are bad. No good water in summer. Really? No good water? No. What a shame. It is his fault. He of Barani, he could make better cisterns. But he is too mean. He owns the cottages, then? Vivaios, of course. On that side of the island, all is his. All the land? He ticked off his stubby fingers. Corbi, Stremi, Borani, Mozza, Bigadi, Zastena. All names of bays and capes around Barani, and apparently this was another complaint against Conchis. Various Athenians, rich people, would have liked to build villas over there, but Conchis refused to sell 1 meter, deprived the island of badly needed wealth. A donkey loaded with wood tripped down the quay toward us, rubbing its legs together, picking its fastidious way like a model. This news proved Demetriades's complicity. It must have been common gossip. I suppose you see his guests in the village? He raised his head negatively, uninterestedly. It was nothing to him whether there were guests or not. I persisted. Did he know if there were foreigners staying over there? But he shrugged. Jesus. Perhaps. He did not know. He raised his head negatively, uninterestedly. It was nothing to him whether there were guests or not. I persisted. Did he know if there were foreigners staying over there? But he shrugged. Jesus. Perhaps. He did not know. Then I had a piece of luck. A little old man appeared from a side alley and came behind Georgiou's back, a battered old seaman's cap, a blue canvas suit so faded with washing that it was almost white in the sunlight. Georgiou threw him a glance as he passed our table, then called, Barba Dimitaki, Ela. Come and speak with the English professor. The old man stopped. He must have been about 80. Very shaky, unshaven, but not totally senile. Georgiou turned to me. Before the war, he was the same as Hermes. He took the mail to Barani. I pressed the old man to take a seat, ordered more ouzo and another meze. You know Barani well? He waved his old hand. He meant very well, more than he could express. He said something I didn't understand. Georgiou, who had some linguistic resourcefulness, piled our cigarette boxes and matches together like bricks. Building. I understand. In 1929? The old man nodded. Did Mr. Conchis have many guests before the war? Many guests. This surprised Georgiou. He even repeated my question, and got the same answer. Foreigners? Many foreigners. Frenchmen, Englishmen, all. What about the English masters at the school? Did they go there? Ne, oloi. Yes, all of them. You can't remember their names? He smiled at the ridiculousness of the question. He couldn't even remember what they looked like, except one who was very tall. Did you meet them in the village? Sometimes. What did they do at Barani before the war? They were foreigners. Georgiou was impatient at this exhibition of village logic. Ne, barba, zenui, mateyekonon. Music, singing, dancing. Once again, Georgiou didn't believe him. He winked at me as if to say, the old man is soft in the head. But I knew he wasn't, and that Georgiou had not come to the island until 1946. What kind of singing and dancing? He didn't know. His rheumy eyes seemed to search for the past and lose it. But he said, and other things. They acted in plays. Georgiou laughed out loud, but the old man shrugged and said indifferently, It is true. Georgiou leaned forward with a grin. And what were you, Barba? Dimitriaki? Karyosis? He was talking about the Greek shadow play Punch. I made the old man see I believed him. What kind of plays? But his face said he didn't know. There was a theater in the garden. Where in the garden? Behind the house, with curtains. A real theater. You know Maria? But it seemed that before the war it had been another housekeeper called Sola, now dead. When were you last there? Many years before the war. Do you still like Mr. Conchis? The old man nodded, but it was a brief, qualified nod. Georgiou chipped in. His eldest son was killed in the execution. I'm very sorry, very sorry. The old man shrugged. Kismet. He said, he is not a bad man. Did he work with the Germans in the occupation? The old man raised his head, a firm no. Georgiou made a hawk of violent disagreement. They began to argue, talking so fast that I couldn't follow them. But I heard the old man say, I was here. You were not here. Georgiou turned to me with a wink. He has given the old man a house and money every year. The old man cannot say what he really thinks. Does he do that for the other relatives? Bah, one or two, the old ones. Why not? He has millions. He made the corruption gesture, meaning conscience money. Suddenly the old man said to me, Mia fora. Once there was a big panegyri with many lights and music and fireworks, Many fireworks and many guests. I had an absurd vision of a garden party, hundreds of elegant women and men in morning dress. When was that? 5 years before the war? Why was this celebration? But he didn't know. Were you there? I was with my son. We were fishing. We saw it up in Borani. Many lights, many voices. Kata pirotechni mata. And the fireworks. Giorgio said, Yeah, you were drunk, Barba. No, I was not drunk. Try as I did, I could get nothing more out of the old man. So in the end, I shook them both by the hand, paid the small bill, tipped Giorgio heavily, and walked back to the school. One thing was clear. There had been Leverrier, Mitford, and myself, but then others whose names I did not yet know back in the 30s, a long line. It gave me a return of great expectations, and the courage to face whatever new was being prepared in that now uncurtained theater over on the far side. I returned to the village that evening and climbed up the narrow cobbled streets that led to the back of the village, past warrens of whitewashed walls, peasant interiors, through tiny squares shaded by almond trees. Great magenta sprays of bougainvillea flamed in the sun or glowed in the pale evening shadows. It was a sort of Kasbah area of the village, a very pretty Kasbah, with its cross glimpses of the plumbago blue 6 o'clock sea below, and the gold-green pine-covered hills above. People sitting outside their cottages greeted me, and I collected the inevitable small Pied Piper chain of children, who subsided into giggles if I looked at them and waved them away. When I came to the church, I went in. I wanted to justify my presence in the quarter. It was densely gloomy, with the miasma of incense over everything. A row of icons, somber silhouettes set in smoky gold, stared down at me, as if they knew what an alien I was in their crypt-like Byzantine world. After 5 minutes, I came out. The children had mercifully disappeared, and I could take the alley to the right of the church. On one side, there were the round cylinders of the church apses. On the other, a wall 8 or 9 feet high. The alley turned, and the wall continued. But halfway along it, there was an arched gateway, a keystone with the date 1823 on it, and above that a place where there had once been a coat of arms. I guessed that the house inside had been built by one of the pirate admirals of the War of Independence. There was a narrow door let into the right hand of the 2 gate doors with a slit for letters. Above it, stenciled white on black on an old bit of sheet metal, was the name Hermes Ambellas. To the left, the ground fell away behind the church. There was no way of looking over the wall from that side. I went to the small door and pushed it gently to see if it gave, but it was locked. The islanders were notoriously honest, thieves unknown, and I could not remember having seen an outer gate locked like that anywhere else on Phraxos. The rocky lane dipped abruptly down between 2 cottages. The roof of the one on the right was below the wall of the house. At the bottom, a cross alley took me back and round to the other side. There the ground fell away even more precipitously, and I found myself looking up 10 feet of vertical rock even before the wall foundation started. The house and its garden walls on this side continued the rock face, and I could see that in fact it was not a very big house, though still, by village standards, much too grandiose for a donkey driver. 2 ground-floor windows, 3 upstairs, all shuttered. They were still in the last sunlight and must have given a fine view west over the village and the straits to the Argolian mainland. Was it a view Julie knew well? I felt like Blondel beneath Richard Coeur de Lion's window, but not even able to pass messages by song. Down in a small square below, I could see 2 or 3 women interestedly watching me. I waved, strolled on, as if my look upwards had been idle curiosity. I came to yet another cross alley and climbed up it to my starting point outside Agios Elias. The house was impregnable to passing eyes. Later, down in front of the Hotel Philadelphia, I looked back. I could see over all the intervening roofs, the church, and the house to the right of it, the 5 windows staring out. They seemed defiant, but blind.